How you doing? So yeah, again, welcome to another edition of CRED Talks. And we have the pleasure of having two esteemed guests, Brother Brian and Sister Afrika Porter, uh, who came together and collaborated to make what I believe is probably, in the realms of one of the best documentaries I've saw in a long time. Chicago at the Crossroads. And so we also have an esteemed panelists, uh, Phil Jackson and Arnie Duncan, who will also be chiming in. So I'll jump right in. Brian, what made you want to do this documentary film?
Thank you for having us, everybody, and I appreciate your time, fellas and ladies tuning in. Thank you for all the work you guys do on the front lines. Sometimes it's a thankless job from the public, but we know who's really putting in the hard work in the streets of Chicago. So thank you all so much for what you do. As a filmmaker, it's important to tell the stories that are important for the perspectives that aren't being told. And when I started this documentary about 15 years ago, I felt that a lot of the country didn't know, and a lot of groups of people didn't know or understand urban poverty, urban violence, why shootings happen. And I think that's still a fact today, that people don't understand our communities. But with the film, why I did it, I wanted to tell the root story, the true story about how oppression, from a racial oppression standpoint, from a segregation standpoint, as well as from a policy standpoint, are directly impacting the streets and the lives of individuals to this very day. And I thought public housing was very intentional when I first saw it. And I was just fascinated, and I thought it was a story that more people needed to hear and know.
And so coming from your background, that's Columbia, was it Columbia College, if I read
Yeah.
right? How did you really just gather the inspiration, being a white guy, to really dig this deep into this epidemic that's going on here in Chicago as it relates to violence and housing inequality?
As a white filmmaker, I look at it as a privilege to be able to come into the community, somebody from the outside, and be able to tell the story of the people. And that's a lot of faith that people have, and trust that people have to put into me to tell the right story, because so many times the right story is not being told. It's the story that's going to be sensationalized. When I first really started documenting homelessness in Chicago, the men downtown at the time, there was a homeless shelter downtown called the Pacific Garden Mission. And I wanted to get to the root causes of homelessness, but you certainly and quickly come to find that it's much deeper than just the men downtown panhandling. We quickly found our way to public housing in Chicago. And what I found was that, one, the people wanted their story to be told and almost were yearning for the story to be told, because the voices, especially in public housing, had been silenced in many ways for a long time. And the stories now are gone just with the buildings. But it's us, the filmmakers like myself and Afrika and activists like Pastor Phil, to make sure those stories stay alive. And it's something I take very seriously. And having the trust of the people in the film is something I didn't want to take in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and you named a bunch of folks that you have in the film. Father Mike Timeo Black, who's phenomenal, Natalie Moore, GLC, Malik Youssef. But how did you, or how are you able to get my sister Afrika Porter on board to do this film with you?
So I had a few cuts of the film already. And when a mutual friend of mine approached the idea of bringing Africa on board, it was a thought process that with somebody with Africa's accolades and background will legitimize from a community standpoint what we're doing. Also, the respect that she has in the community and the relationships that she has. So she was able to help us take a film that maybe was a little bit just on the street level to bring it to the more eyeballs from not just a marketing perspective to see who we might be able to fit in here. That'd be a perfect blend, but to also help push it forward, from an activism standpoint, and a filmmaking standpoint, because it's just not about getting out the cameras. You have to have a plan and move it forward.
In Africa, I know you from a variety of different worlds, but particularly being really, someone who has stood up for our plight as it relates to Black and Latinx people here. And I know there's been some project that you have just turned down, right? Because you didn't feel that they were going to be effective in really telling the story of our people. So what made you collaborate on this particular film?
Let me just say thank you for having me. And, like Brian was saying, it is kind of like a thankless position to be in, because when you do this work, you do the work. It's not for what you're looking for or the accolades. For me, a lot of times, people tend to, say things like, I appreciate the work you did here, this organization or this project, but when I wake up and I see, 17 murders in 6 hours, I don't feel well. So it's not a good thing when you live in this city where you really have the tale of two cities. I grew up in Hyde Park, and for a long time, I didn't necessarily know that everyone didn't have what I had. So at my elementary school, back then in the 70s, okay, we had encyclopedias. So when my friends needed to do a report and they didn't have, the research mechanisms to do that, well, we had a home library. You know what I mean? It was just like a small room just filled with books. And in my understanding, that's where I would go to do my assignments. I didn't know until people started coming over, like, well, she got a mom and a dad in the house, she has books in the house. We can just do our homework over there. I'm like, well, we can go to your house too, so that's to say, I'm thankful, and you don't know what you know until something else is presented to you sometimes. So for me, I like to say we are our own solution. The duality that Brian and I have is that we're alike, but we're also different. We both have the compassion, the understanding, and we want to see different. We want to see better. And how we met, the vision that our mutual friend had for me to be a part of this project, he had been talking about the project for some time. So when Brian showed me some of the footage, I was thoroughly impressed. And I felt it right away, because I'm like, wow, I've been with this organization, that organization, I came up through Operation Push, with Reverend Jackson. I'm like, wow, he'd be great, a great voice to have. My sister had been doing some work with Pastor Phil, and I had done some work with him as well. Dr. Timmy Black was my professor, at the University of Chicago. So, Dr. Carol Adams, one of my mentors. It was, not a very, very hard reach, but it was a strong reach and a very honorable reach to reach out to these people who have been constant, like you were saying, and doing the work, to put them on the project and to see if they would be, so obliged to be a part of it as well. So just honored and thankful, and I'm happy to see that the conversations are continuing to happen around the challenges and issues that we're seeing in the city that are not just unique to Chicago.
So let's talk about this plans for transformation, if you will. I can recall being called in probably in around 2010 to come into the Cabrini Green Housing Projects. And there were 3 buildings left. I think it was 364, 365, and another building. And And what they wanted me to do was to start finding places that some of the families could relocate to safely, meaning that you had these folks who had been there for a very long time, and now you're displacing them in different neighborhoods. And a lot of them had young boys who were street and gang affiliated. But the thing that kind of, threw me aback is that I was only called in when there were 2 buildings left. So that means that about 20,000 families had already been relocated into these other communities. And I felt that that was working backwards, but I did, what I could do. So, and I'll start with you, Afrika. What did you really learn from all of this digging so deep? I know you already have a rich history of what was happening, but what did you really learn different doing this particular film?
What did I learn different?
Yes.
I learned that the more things change, the more they stay the same. I learned that wherever African people are on the planet Earth, there's some challenges there. I learned that a lot of the atrocities and the challenges that we're seeing with African people are designed. I learned that there is strength in our unity, there is strength in our collaboration, and I've learned that we are our own solution. Conversations like this move to power, move to activism. People are inspired by what they see, what they don't see. People learn every day new things, and I think it's gonna take all of us, as we've traveled with the film, we've learned that it's not unique to Chicago. Mm-hmm. St. Louis is leading in homicides, New York City, and you would think even during a pandemic, you understand? But you also have to attribute that to the extremities of it being higher. When people are always in survival mode already before a pandemic, a lot of people already understood the pandemic before it came because people have always been in pandemia already. So I think it's a learning curve in terms of what is there to learn. We have to learn how to better utilize what we have and collaborate and love each other more and be there for each other more and support each other more, just period.
Can I jump
Brian,
in? Yeah.
Go ahead.
What I learned from this process is what so many people never learned. So many people, even people in these communities, but our police officers, our health workers, many of the people who live in our city, and even a lot of the guys maybe on this call who didn't know what happened to their communities. That's what I learned, was that people didn't know. And whether the facts got swept under the rug, whether it was because these were Black people who were disenfranchised, relocated, segregated multiple times. That's what I learned the most, is that people didn't know what you thought they did. So when a police officer is serving a community, shouldn't we say he should watch this film to understand the community that he is serving? Or if a doctor works at Mount Sinai Hospital, should that doctor understand the history of these communities? Wouldn't that allow them to serve these communities better? That's how I feel we can use the film, and that's what I learned.
Thank you. Arnie, so, watching this film, there was some things that I knew, and there was some other things that I learned. And one of the things that I didn't know is that, that there had to be 7 people, that there was an average of 7 people in every household with a median income of $5,000, right? And then it seemed to be this ploy to remove the Black male from the family. And Arnie, you and myself, we had the opportunity to speak to our former president-elect Barack Obama. And he also spoke on the effects of not having a father in the home. And we talk to young men all the time, and that seems to be, if not the main problem, one of the major problems. Could you speak to that, Arnie, as it relates to some of the young men that we speak to and work with daily?
Yeah, first I just want to thank Africa and Brian and Phil. It's just, hey now, so good to see you. It's just so fascinating to me. I don't want to go too long, but this combination of policy, which is so important, of historical context, which is so important, of storytelling, which they did a masterful job, and just the hard work and the life's devotion that Pastor Phil and others have given to this, and sort of pulling all those threads together. Those are normally separate worlds; they don't connect too much. And to see all those threads pulled together into not just a coherent but a powerful story, it was moving. It was moving. You learn something, and it moves us. So yeah, I mean, the history here, Kurt, is just so insidious. You almost have to go back to slavery and the separation of intentional separation of families, and taking kids from their mothers or fathers or whatever to whoever. There can't be a good motive for that. I mean, you try not to question everybody's motive, but I can't possibly conceive what the positive motive was in that thinking. And to see that destruction, I will go, and I haven't really said this publicly, but if you remember, Curtis, our first graduation that we did out in Rosen with our guys there, I'll never forget, we had mothers, we had grandmothers, we had children, we had girlfriends, we had aunties, we had uncles. That first graduation, we didn't have a single father of one of our men. And it didn't sort of hit me until I went home that night. I sort of tried to think, and maybe I missed somebody, but I don't think I did. And that separation of men and young girls from their fathers is so deep and so profound and so devastating, particularly in the Black community. You could say a little bit on the Latino Latinx community, but I'd say much less so, really in the Black community. And then not to go too long, the thing that from a policy standpoint that we struggle with, and I'd love to get Brian or Africa, if Kurt, your thoughts, or Phil's, that I hated the projects. I hated going to the projects. People know all these stories. Robert Taylor was actually named for my good friend Valerie Jarrett for her grandfather. And it was a total stain on their family's legacy. They were so horrified by all that it stood for. It's supposed to be some big honor, and it was something that was devastating. So I hated the projects. I hated going to Robert Taylor. Went to Cabrini a little bit, not much. Knew Robert Taylor a lot better just because of the South Side. Hated it. I was thrilled when they tore it down. Thought that was the right thing. But then tearing it down was a really bad idea because there are no transition plans and there was no movement. There's no help people move and job placement or social services or just any of that. And so all of it, the projects were terrible. Putting everybody out was terrible, and just the lack of thought into all of these things, the lack of doing the real nitty gritty work of helping families stay together. It's pretty it's just a devastating indictment, frankly, of public policy that I could maybe had some good points, maybe didn't, but the net impact was really tough. And the final thing I want to say is, I don't want to go too long, is that I also don't want people to romanticize the projects. There's things are tough now, but for people people who grew up in the project, people who lived in a way that I never did, that was tough. That was tough. There was joy, there was love, there were good things, but we want to just talk homicides, Kurt, going back to the heyday of the projects. As bad as things are now, it was 30, 40, 50% worse then. And a lot of that was coming from and in between the projects. So I don't want to, this is not like the good old days in my mind. It was tough then, it's tough now, and we got to get to a better place.
Pastor Phil, and then Brian, the same question. Was this by design?
So when you read the book, by Mike Royko on Boss, right? He talks about that Daddy Daley said, basically, we'll come back to that area, Cabrini Green, when it's worth something, right? That was in his book. He wrote that from an interview he had with Daddy Daley. So to me, when I hear that, I'm like, that's a design, because he is saying there's no value in it right now. We're just gonna put a bunch of niggas over here and keep them over that way, right? And manage as Cabrini Green is this major new sort of quote unquote innovative housing project to house Black folks in one area. Then you find then the trickle down effect of leadership within Chicago Housing Authority that says, you know, they're trying to fight, and folks are on both sides of the street with the person who was leading, I forget his name right now, who was leading CHA at the time that Brian was recording, and the data, the history from that, who believed that he had sincere motives to say, no, we really want to make this better. But then after a while, when he was even interviewed, even in the film, I just give up. The gang's going to take over, such as so. Was it by design? I think from that statement from Mike Royko's book, yeah, we know the racial tension with Daddy Daley in the context of Chicago and how that created just let them shoot themselves. From him telling the fire department during the riots, you know, shoot at will, shoot, you know, on site. So that's how I perceive it, right? I do know that you know, there's a lot of folks who, you know, from Cabrini who fought through that and didn't get caught up, or got caught up and got back in and shifted their life. So there's a lot of folks who you can't just blanket everybody in that context, even though it was a lot of struggle to make it happen. So I think that there's a lot to say about purposefulness. My wife has been housing for 30 years, all affordable housing. She built Dr. King Legacy Apartments. She's building something on in Bronzeville, this 80-something unit or whatever apartment. And when she's trying to get homeowners or apartment owners on the North Shore who have to have 10% of their place to be affordable housing, you know what some of the comments are? The comments are, let me just build something in Lawndale and just call it that. In other words, by design, I don't want these people in my space. By design, I'd rather just build something in your quote unquote project ghetto neighborhood instead of welcoming people who say, I want to live on the North Shore and I can do it. I'm in an affordable housing bracket and I can live there. So when you ask me that question, all these kind of history things in my mind and my wife's experience come to play. So I do see it that way. But I know our people are smarter than allowing the design just to suck them in. And that's why I say that there's a lot of great people who said, oh, I peeped this. I'm taking my kids to school. I'm walking them back. I'm gonna make sure to get that homework done, you know? And so though they had to fight through several things, though they recognize the design, some people, a good number of people just made it out and were successful.
Brian, same question. He's on mute.
You're on mute, Brian.
Gotcha. The answer to your question is yes. The projects were intentional, just like the Black Belt was intentional, just like Jim Crow laws were intentional in the South. When people moved to Chicago, they were looking for another way of life. Now, today, if you see what's happened in the streets, it is very difficult to undo the mistakes of our predecessors, those who came before us. So when you talk about the development of the slums by segregation in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and then continuing segregation tactics and restrictive covenants, the mistakes today are seen everywhere. It was very intentional, and the intentionality with the segregation, with building the projects, with the dismantling of public housing and the resegregation of people, we have to be as equally intentional with the reinvestment in these communities. And I see it in the city, but I don't see it as much as I see it with this group of people, with CRED, with the Firehouse and Pastor Phil. And if we had more of that, we can start to turn the situation of this city in a very different way. Now we have the pandemic adding more difficulties into the job at hand, but the good people just have to keep the fight. But when I first went to the projects, I looked up at them, and it was at the Harold Ickes, which was Hilliard Homes, Ickes, Stateway, Robert Taylor. And that's the first thing I said when I looked up at the buildings. This has to be an intentional design. And just one point on Arnie's comments about, and they certainly weren't glamorous places. We've seen the movies, Candyman and some of the other TV shows. But when they did tear them down, you know, people had been in these homes for generations. They didn't know much else. So we also have to keep in mind that these were people's homes. And undoing the mistakes of the past came with a lot of broken hearts as well.
And yeah, Brian, just to elaborate on that, when I worked in Cabrini, when they were in the last process of tearing them down, I can remember an older lady, and she had received a voucher to move right across the street into a $250,000 home, right, an apartment. And she still was crying. She was like, I would rather live across the street in the building that's being torn down. And I think that hits on a lot of the things that you're saying. And unfortunately, she was eventually put out. And I think that was by design, because she was cooking collard greens and the other residents say they didn't like the smell.
Yeah.
And so, so, you had a lot of that stuff going on as well. So Afrika, Brian he touched on a lot of things in that. Could you also touch on what you think is some of the root causes of a lot of this violence that's going on here in Chicago and abroad?
Wow, it's so many. Wow, yeah. A lot of the root causes just go all the way back, as Arnie said, to slavery. I remember, my parents telling us about when they came to Chicago from the South, and then by way of Arkansas and then Kansas City. Because, they were educated Black people in the 1930s, they were able to do certain things, and, thank God for that they were allowed and able to manifest their education in that way. Everyone still has not. A lot of root causes stem from the systematic racism and white supremacy, that we know all about too well. I think it's just very unfortunate that in 2020, we're still having these conversations, It almost wants you to look at it in terms of what is more of the solution, in terms of we have to go back, like the Sankofa, to see where we came from, to know where we're going. But we also want to put energy and focus into the now, you understand? Because we have generations of children that are being born to what, So it's just like Philip Jackson from the Black Star Project, rest in peace, would always say, are we asking schools to do what schools cannot do? And I love that, I was honored to be able to edit that piece that he wrote so well, because it's a question of, we're asking the question about the problem and who created the problem. You understand? You have people that are being born into a problem, people being born into some horrific conditions and deep conditions, I'm looking at Brother Richard Blackman, he almost has me in tears over here, looking at some of his comments over here about, growing up there and children dying too soon and things that he saw. I'm thinking about Brother Lance Kepler's book, where he goes into detail about the vice lords and how, growing up in inner city housing projects as he did, what some of the things that he saw, it's kind of unimaginable. However, you do have the stories of your Jesse Whites, who came from these housing projects and were hugely successful and did go back and reach back and do so much work and so much philanthropy to keep building and building and building, for future generations. The problem, was created, and I think that more so than the problem, we have to put a lot more energy and a lot more research and study and collaborative power into the solution.
And I definitely agree with you. So just on that note, to the panel, what are some of the solutions? And we'll start with Arnie.
Well, I'll maybe just start on a problem. I'll try and get a solution. The history that I still don't feel I fully understand is why the projects. And the only thing I can think is that the goal was to keep white neighborhoods white, that there were too many Black people in Chicago and you didn't want them spreading into other neighborhoods. So let's, create, what was known as ghettos first, redlined, definitely separated out. And then as those numbers swelled and there wasn't enough places for people, then you do the vertical buildings that just allow you to put 20,000 people on a square block rather than, a couple families. And I think for me, just really understanding that genesis, or what I believe to be that genesis. Again, I don't say I fully know that the root cause of all of this, may just be simple racism. Nothing more complex, nothing more, complicated than that. That did we truly need projects in Chicago? That's just sort of the fair question. And I don't know that we did. And had people been able to move to other neighborhoods, had we had a commitment to subsidized housing and, mixed income housing, had people been distributed and had a chance to move, north side and Lincoln Park and all those other things, how different would our history be? I mean, it's just sort of a mind-boggling question. How different would people's lives be? How much safer would things be? So that's history. To your point.
Before you go there,
okay,
Arnie,
okay.
Brian, you did a lot of extensive research into Arnie's question. Why the projects?
Sure. So the projects was a national push as part of the New Deal after World War II to infuse housing into the United States. So there was a housing shortage. So in the very beginning of public housing in the 50s, they weren't all segregated. But as we saw white flight take effect in the 50s and 60s, and we had housing loans that were being given to white families, but were not being afforded to African-American families. So when we talk about equity today, that has a big part of it. Why white families have a head start of 100, 150 years, 200 years in modern day over Black families. It's because of the systems that were put into place. So when we started to suburbanize our cities, and you combine that with the demanufacturing era of the 60s and 70s, now all of these policies that were supporting racism was a poison pill, because now you're left with the poorest African-American families in public housing who could not get out. And that's when we started to see pipes busting in the wintertime, when you talk about intentionality. That's when we started to see whole floors being shut off. And if you look at Robert Taylor, whole buildings, there was a building called The Hole, where they put the worst people, the people with all their mental issues, the people with the records, into one area. So public housing was an easy way at the time to continue segregation in the city. But public housing did not cause our current issue. Public housing was a continuation of the policies we've seen in this country.
And I remember the hole. I used to spend a lot of time in there. It was a stronghold for the Cobra Stones. Arnie, I'm sorry to cut you off, but back to what are some of the solutions, Arnie?
No, this is just understand the history, and the anecdotes are just so hugely important. So I think honestly, the solutions are easy to articulate, and it's just we lack the courage or the will to do it. This is not rocket science. This is not finding a cure for cancer or putting a man on Mars or whatever. This is, look, what didn't happen. What didn't happen was investment in these communities. They were starved. What didn't happen, you think about how do you build wealth in America? And this is what we're sort of trying to push so hard of our young men. The first place you build wealth is owning your own home and having equity in your home and not paying rent and not paying a landlord, and being able to have that home appreciate in value and sell that home and move to a nicer home or do whatever you want with those, help pay for your kids to go to college. By definition, when you're in public housing, you have no ownership. You have no ability to own anything. And so you have no ability to build family or generational wealth. You are locked out of that. So investing in communities, chances for home ownership, all the stuff we know, investment in schools, investment in after school programs, investment in places like the Firehouse. It's not, we can all sit here and articulate these things extraordinarily easily. It's just that we have the courage. And I'll say something, Africa is friends of Phil Jackson, the other Phil Jackson, who unfortunately passed. Phil was an amazing man. He grew up in public housing. Like, he had a huge heart for this. These weren't all bad people by any stretch. He was really, really a good person, given an almost impossible charge to try and do something, and did good work. And we talked all the time, and just his agony, his frustration, what he was trying to accomplish and the odds he's against. So I want people to understand there were great people working on this stuff, but the system was, the system was designed to fail. It wasn't like an accident. The system was designed to fail. But those investments and belief in human capital, and the final thing I'll say is that ultimately it's not being scared of our neighbors. It's understanding that these families have value, that they have much to contribute, that they aren't pulling down the city, or they're not in danger to your family or mine, that if we're able to live and grow together, that diversity actually makes us stronger as a city, stronger as a community, stronger as a family. But that's, I can't say we're any closer in 2020 than we were back in the 60s or 70s. I could actually make a case we may be in a worse position today than then, which is a sad thing to say, but that's my honest opinion.
Did some extensive work with you and some of the young brothers from the firehouse. One of the things that I noticed is, when going into some of the homes in those neighborhoods and then the graduation, man, some of those brothers didn't make it, man, right? And man, when I was watching it, it touched me, man, to see the faces and just, just for that small period of time, it seemed like they had so much hope, and they're not here anymore, man. Could you just speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, the journey with the young men is, to me and to those in CRED and at the firehouse is a lifetime journey. You know what I'm saying? You enter into the life of young men, 17, 18, 19 or whatever. They got 20 years of trauma already, and you bring in, and what we say, a fire hydrant of hope. With the hope and their hope that may have been deferred is they reignite it, and they borrow your hope to believe again. Dropping out of school, being dissed by family, having a bogus reputation with family or with the streets. And as they borrow that hope, man, you join with them with the destiny that we speak life into them to who they're going to be or who they already are. And we walk in that way as the kings and the queens that they are, men and women, with hopes that they'll mimic that. However, the streets don't forgive easy. They don't forgive easy at all. And they, no matter what generation, I know a guy got out of jail 8 years after he got busted over some drug situation, but a guy shot him and killed him over a dice game that happened 8 years ago before he got locked up because he needed $100. So the streets are unforgiving. And so a part of our desire, right, and I hope it's not blind, is that the brothers will step into their purpose, walk in authority, strengthen their character, and will change the paradigm of where they were. Some of that, though, I'm beginning to settle, may have to be in Atlanta, may have to be in Houston. I may not be able to see the fruits of your growth and stuff in this city. It may have to be because we got you out of here. We're talking to some guys about just because of the unforgiveness of the streets. It hurts, man. When I look at the graduation, I look at letters and emails and text messages of guys and the precipice of hope that they were owning themselves. They was like, I'm about this new life. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Arnie. It's like, that's the dude I know. That's the guy I know. And yet somebody follows them to the crib on some unforgiveness type stuff. And it just hurts. But it doesn't mean we stop, though. Doesn't mean we stop. It just means that we look in the eyes of the next guy and believe that this one going to walk in their destiny that way. And I believe that, it's trauma for everybody, though. I mean, it's trauma for those who serve and walk alongside these brothers, as well as the brothers themselves and their history. The guys been with each other for 15 years. They've been with each other since sixth grade. And the complications of life and family and some things, how housing affects things like we were talking about, and that injustice ripples into education. Now you're in a school system that doesn't work out. And so you just go into what is most favorable in the streets. And you collect a group of guys that roll with you in that context. And that bond is solid and it never goes away. That's why birthdays are important. When somebody passed away, birthdays jump off and everybody's in white or everybody's in whatever, and got the posters and stuff, because it is, I'm never letting go of the endearment of my brother who passed away. And I believe in my conversation with him, like, the baton is now passed. Like, you still here for a reason. You're
Yes.
still here for a reason. I was talking to one of the young guys the other day. I'm like, man, you are here for I said, first of all, you suck as a criminal. You suck as a criminal. You suck as a criminal. Perhaps maybe that's not what the ideal path for you to go into. And so you're here for a reason. With all the things that could have happened and didn't, there's a lot more in store for you in that way. And I think, brothers moving in groups of in their clusters, in a mobs or whatever, so it is they grow in success and power, I think, in those same kind of clusters and family. Because I can't be the only one wanting to go to Malcolm X or Howard Washington or get a trade. All of a sudden there's 3 of us and there's 5 of us. I mean, brothers don't go to the store by themselves. They go with 2. Even if one of them broke, then I'm gonna go with you, right? So it is with our communities, tribal in that context. So I believe as we can see that on a negative end, as guys may have had crazy life experiences and they seek to move differently in community, they can see that success themselves that way. But it's not without its hardships.
Kurt, real quick, and not to put you on the spot, you're playing Oprah here, not me, but I know how deeply this stuff touches you. And I know how when that emotion hits, that's coming from a really, really deep place. And if you're willing to, what does it make you feel to see that, to feel that, to remember that? What are you thinking?
Man, I'm sitting here, I was sitting watching it, and my wife was just like, what's wrong? I was like, man, I know those kids, and they're not here anymore, and I saw Keyshawn with that smile in the audience, man, and it hit deep, and he was one of the ones who we really felt was on a good path, just like the other young brother, man. When he was graduating, he was standing there, and again, I just saw so much hope. And sometimes it makes you pause to say, what could I have done different? Or what more could I have done? Or what more can I do? And, it's hard, but like Pastor Phil said, it's still a motivating drive to let us know that we do have to do more, right? And we can't stop. And we have to be the change that we want to see. And yeah, it's hard, man. We'll be, burying, putting Keyshawn to rest tomorrow. And also the brother from the firehouse, man, I remember they were the first group, man, that we started with, man, the AMG guys, man.
Yep.
And he
Yep,
was
Latrell.
yeah. And he was, probably, one of the harder brothers that we've worked with on that side, but to see the transformation that he was going through, and then the level of change that he made to still be gunned down like an animal, man, it was hard. It was hard, and it's still hard.
Right. Yeah, it is. It is.
So I see the brother Ali has come on. That means that my time is up. I thank all of you, our esteemed guests, for being here and having such a deep and in-depth conversation. I hope to see you all again. We could talk more about this and as well as future endeavors. So I thank you for your time and thank you for joining us here at CRED. I'll turn it over to my brother, Kanoy Ali.
Thank you, Curtis.
Thanks, Curtis. Good to see you.
Yeah, this is a
Thank you, Kurt.
moving testament. Brian, when you started, I read somewhere that you started this documentary about 20 years ago. In 2000, 20 years ago. So how did the community accept you? How was that?
So I'm on, yeah. Here's what I want to say about this is that the perception of these communities is negative. You see the worldwide news articles every day. It's negative. But when you are in the communities, you understand that, hey, I'm not about to get robbed. There's not a shooting on every corner. That people have love here, not for just for one another, but for other people too, for people who come in and, you know, want to invest in the community or want to tell the stories. So but at the same time, I'll give you one example. At the projects, well, the first time I went in about 2004 at the Harold Ickes, it was a sunny day. People were out. They were coming up to us, wondering what was going on. How you doing? I'd like to be interviewed, so on and so forth. I came back about a week later, and it was an overcast day. And the feeling in the community was much different than the day I came a week prior. There was not much different that I noticed, other than the energy was a very negative one. And it was very concerning. There were a lot of police officers. There were a lot of, you know, looks that we were catching. Come to find out that 113 people overdosed on fentanyl over the weekend and the previous week. So that changes these, you know, the people in these communities are human beings. There's, even in the projects, there's this view that they were these hardened people, when that's just not the case. So to that, I want to bridge to just the point is that if you have one shooting on a block, that's one family, one person on one block, times that by 54 per weekend sometimes. That's 54 households on 54 blocks in one weekend. And the trauma that and the carryover effect that happens with that is so severe, and the lack of clinical psychologists to offer this PTSD counseling is another area where we really need to look at increasing.
Thank you. We got Dr. T, he got a question for you guys.
I really had more of a statement, and you know, my brother, I'm one of the psychologists that we may need to get more of. I really have more of a statement. I'll make it quick. You know, I worked in Cabrini from the time I came to Chicago in 2004 to about 2010. You know, and so worked directly in the community with families, you know, in their homes, in the schools, out in the yard, you know, you name it, but have an opportunity to just witness not only the incredible devastation of this level of oppression, you know, the violence and all of that. But I agree so much. It was also a lot of beauty there. The families were wonderful, you know, parents and children and grandparents loving each other, caring for each other, trying to do their best, had great pride in Cabrini. I didn't know any family that wanted to leave, right? So it was just a continuation of forced migration and everything along with it. But I just wanted to make that comment. Appreciate what you all are doing.
Just to add in there, Dr. T, I'm personally from the village of 1212 West Roosevelt, and that was a real village for me growing up. It was a village, and this is a place where if I'm starving, I go next door and there's bread, butter, sugar, whatever my mother sends me. Go ask Miss Smith, you know, and then Miss Smith may ask next week, hey, and it's almost like a give and take type of thing, and we looked out for each other. It's nothing to romanticize because we've seen the destruction in the area, but we know we can look now and say, okay, well, how did crack and heroin get in to a place where really no one leaves out of? Like no one leaves out, and we started to kind of protect ourselves. Like it was when we talking about community policing, that was community policing there because we looked out for each other. And the only time the police ever came in was to pick up the bodies, you know, and possibly arrest the people that somebody said did it. But often murderers, rapists, and whoever kind of walked around, and the community dealt with them if someone either took them out or beat them up or something to that degree, but the community dealt with the situation. It's nothing romanticized, but when you can go past a place you grew up and see no memory of it, it does something to you psychologically, like you didn't have a childhood. Like you can't say, I used to play there, I used to go to school there. All that's gone. And every place like that right now has a new structure, and it's about how long is your money, can you live there? So we go back to the question. I just want to put that out. Do either one of you know, like, anybody keep up with the brother Edwin? Okay, Dr. Phil, Pastor Phil, how's he doing?
Edwin is what we call an active alumni. He's with us now 3 days a week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. He was with us today at the firehouse. In other words, the young men that are currently active in our work are doing what they do in programmatic work with our VIP work, and then Edwin is in the kitchen working. We have started a catering company. We need to keep our hands on Edwin. You know, young brothers oftentimes get to a point, I think I can dribble now. I think I can shoot layups now. And the stuff gets swatted and gets smacked, pinned against the wall after they graduate or after they move into alumni status. And if there's not a consistent connection, they can fall back into stuff. And Edwin's had 4 young men in Austin, you probably heard about it, got shot. 3 of them got killed. One of them still alive, I believe. And I think Dr. T was talking to Edwin about that, I think at one time, or connecting with him about that. Just recently, somebody got killed this past Saturday in Edwin's group of guys that he connects with in L-Town. But he's with us 3 days a week. We're walking with him. We have our navigators who are mentoring him around where he wants to go. He got into Columbia College at one time, but that might have been maturity way before his measure in a context of thinking I'm ready to jump into this. And so I'm trying to, stay with him, walk with him in baby steps, directing him in the path he desires to go into. And so he's got a different perspective on his head now. He's got caught up in some stuff. So we got some lawyers working with him on some other things too. So, but he's with us Wednesday through Friday.
Final question to the panel, and I would look for you all to give a response if you can. What is a systematic response to systematic racism?
Man,
you know what? You were the first one.
I want to, respond from Dr. Amos Wilson, who a group of us, including Barbara Conrad Royal, a recent ancestor from the Center for Inner City Studies, allowed myself and some others to come together and form this institution, the Dr. Amos Wilson Institute. And I would like to give one of his quotes, of which we believe that he was one of the premier psychologists of our time.
Yes, ma'am.
To a great extent, I knew you would appreciate this too. To a great extent, the problems that we are confronted with today as African people and African people in America flows from our powerlessness or our inappropriate use of power. We've been made to think that power is sinful and that to pursue it is a sinful pursuit. But you cannot exist without power. Without power, there is no life. You need power to act, to behave in the world. And consequently, then, we must interpret what we are about in terms of power. And we have the power, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, we have the possibilities. We just need to reorganize ourselves. We need to organize our consciousness and our personalities and our culture and see them as instruments of power and use them as instruments of power to transform our situation. So to me, we formed the Dr. Amos Wilson Institute, of which we formed this organization 11 years ago. We still meet every Thursday at the Center for Inner City Studies. And the whole point of this organization, this institution, is to concern ourselves and build and study amongst those who left the blueprint for us, of which he wrote the blueprint for Black Power. So in closing, to respond to what you were saying, I think the solution resides in us. We are our own solution. I can't say it enough. Conversations like this, organizations like this, people like us, we have to continue to build on that. And we have to continue to do the work, not give up, not feel defeated. You understand? Because people are having conversations and we're not in the room, but they're speaking about us and the work that we're doing, just like we're bringing ancestors to be in this conversation with us today. I say.
Sure.
7 Emmy nominations. What's next? You, Brian, Africa, Sister Africa, and Brian. What's next?
Yeah, I think that the work with this film is just getting started. And to kind of piggyback on what Africa was saying, you know, and the work you guys are doing, and the guys that are watching, you know, you have a lot of power yourselves to help turn the tide, you know, between your groups of guys and your friends, you know, speaking to the guys in your program. You have more power than you think. And I know there's a lot going on in the world that will, you know, kick you down and make you feel like there's no hope, but there's a lot of hope out there. And, you know, CRED's programming model with partnering with corporations in Chicago, I think is extremely important, that the city has to realize that these communities are not islands. What happens in these communities affects everybody in Chicago, all Chicagoans. These are collateral consequences of violence. And I think in the future, we have to continue to put pressure on these corporate 500 companies downtown Chicago who can benefit and help, or at least assist with the dilemma of violence in Chicago.
Sister Africa.
Yes, sir. What's
Seven,
next?
after 7 Emmy nominations, what's next for you, Queen?
I agree with Brian. I think we're just getting started. We have work to do. We just can't stop here. Lots of conversations and people reaching out about, you know, collaborations and, you know, what it can look like if we put more pen to the paper, you know, more writing, of course, more dialogues, more conversations around how do we rebuild our community? How do we reinvest in the Black family? You know what I mean? So before you can even look to how you're gonna get to work, one has to know the means of which, how they're gonna provide for themselves to get to work, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, the very, very, very finite way of how we think today, of how we're looking at life during this pandemic is all questionable, you know, and there's so many uncertainties that I just think we have to stay focused. And for me, just doing more, you know, within what I have. Excited about the Emmy wins, the nominations, but I also know that there's so much more work to do, so much more work to do, and I'm up for it.
Yeah, and we want to use this film to help you guys in any way you can, or in any way the film can help you guys. That's what it's here for. We want to spread it throughout the land, and please reach out if we can be of any assistance in the future.
Thank you guys. Arnie, any last words? Okay. Yeah.
I'm just so appreciative. Amazing work, and thank you. Remarkable.
Yeah, really, after Queen Africa speak, it's like almost drop the mic time.
Right, that's hard.
Pastor
Phil. I'm so honored.
Pastor Phil, brother.
Grateful for this discussion. I'm, you know, with Arnie, I know there's several layers, policy and everything else that has to really create change. But I believe the brothers and the men and the women on this call, those listening, are the change agents. The power is always within us.
That's right.
And as we walk in that way, you know, I'm not saying it's gonna be smooth, but it'll be powerful and it'll change the course of time. So let's just keep grinding. Let's just keep grinding. Wake up another day and make it happen.
Amen. Thank you guys for joining us, and with love, honor, and care, concern, we say from Chicago CRED, we appreciate everything you've done. And this piece of work is immaculate, man. We'll be showing this. It will go down in history as a, great piece of art. So with that being said, we'll see you guys in 2 more weeks with another piece. Kurt, you got something you want to speak to?
Ashe.
Ashe, bro.
Ashe. Thanks, Curtis.
Thank you.
Peace, Ali.
Peace.
Peace, Africa. Peace, Brian.
Brother Phil.
Peace, Dr.
Okay, love
T.
you all. Everybody be safe.
Peace.